So, I'm so glad to be here today, and I appreciate your invitation. And I hope that at the end of this presentation, you will actually be glad that you have invited me, and it will be impactful. So today's presentation I divided into sessions, and part of the sessions will basically start with an introduction in which I'm going to talk about when we talk about the black history or black heritage or experiences, who is a black person or who are the black people we're talking about, whose history and which history, and as the title says, about the untold part. So I'm going to talk about the told and on the untold part of slavery, of colonialisms, and some other things which I tagged pride, prejudice against pride, in which I'm going to bring some insight up from what happened right within 18th 24th century, and in order to change our view and also to make us to actually understand some other perspective to the history, not just of the black people but the history of mankind in general. And the conclusion, I'm going to just like present to us what we may think our duty is, the call to action irrespective of our race and color. So I'm going to start this presentation from a subjective point of view first, by talking about myself growing up in Nigeria, in Africa, and we're taught education plus religion is equal to sources. I don't even know who I am beyond the fact that I'm a human being until I step outside where I was brought up in Nigeria. So when I step out of my state or my town, they know me as a Yoruba person. They call me Yoruba. Then when I step out of Nigeria to visit other parts of Africa, they call me a Nigerian. And when I step out of the continent entirely, they call me a black person. And this entire tagging and classification is what everyone experiences. So you can be able to ask yourself, who you are, and be able to understand that, first of all, some of these tags, whether you are a Caribbean or you are a Jamaican or you are from England or you are from Scotland, most of all these are just description, and they are just social classification, but they go beyond who you are as a person, your own identity. And the perspective where I'm taking some of all this thing into cognizance is the fact that most of these tags, be it whatever you are called, be it Nigerian, Yoruba, African, black, has connotations, prejudice, historical antecedents, in which sometimes can cover the identity of an individual person, and we can begin to transport ideas and things we believe about those categories. We can begin to transport it on an individual, and that is one thing I want us to be so conscious of, that when we're talking about black, white, or whatever, all this tagging does not actually describe us as individual. And when we talk about some of all these street, but the social convention put us. And when we talk about what happened in history, it's not to generalize it, it's not to present it as a kind of this happened and the white people did this or the Europeans did this, and we make it all Europeans. And that's one of the warning I want to bring forward as we enter into today's presentation. So I would just want us to do a kind of experimentation for us, which is to imagine ourselves, just sleeping and waking up in the morning. And if you're black, just imagine that you have turned white. And if you're white, imagine you have turned black or whatever complexion you may be. And take your consciousness back in history. And just imagine you find yourself in the 15th and the 16th century world. And then for the first time, you are encountering a group of people who look exactly like you, except for the color of your skin or other facial features. And I guess, what comes to your mind? Imagine you're black now, you turn to white. What will you do? What could we have done better in history? What could we have done better to what we hear about is going on in history, and what can we do even in the present, which will be part of history for some people to come, many years to come? So I guess those of us at this today's seminar, I guess you will first of all, you will actually love, to actually overlook the differences in language and religion and reach out, and to understand the new group of people. Now, this imagination it's what resonates into an aspect of this particular presentation, in the sense that if we talk about things that happened in the past too, we have to know that not all the people that will be grouped under this category are accused. And for me as a person, I grew up to actually know wonderful and good British, Europeans, those who were like my beloved Reverend Father John Oye, who actually, I'm Augustine, when at my baptism, it was one of those persons who talked about the great Augustine of Africa and praying that I become like that. And we talk about my favorite lecturer, late Professor Joe Kenny. So we talk about growing up to, for some of us, we don't allow history to cloud our minds in such a way that we begin to hate people. That will block us from encountering people who will help us, people who will even show us more insight and who will make us to actually relate better. So what I say is that when we hear about slavery, colonialism and all these things, it should not affect us, because we're going to meet wonderful and good people and nice people, and we should not allow history to make us feel that there is black and white and contrast and as if many things are still going on. As I've discussed earlier, the social stratification goes beyond just giving you tags, but you realize that it recognizes in other aspects when we talk about tribes, birth of origin, your sex, age, physical attributes, psychological attributes, which it means it's not peculiar to and color. So each person respectively, you can find people across all the races. We can find them in all these categories, in any section of this category. So we can't attribute any to just one particular. And when we talk about events that happen or things that are still going on, you know that most of all these things that differentiate us, color is the most visible part of it. And color played a big role in history, and that's why we still talk about having Black History Month. In the song of Lennon, in the song Imagine there is no country, nothing to kill or die for, imagine no possession, no need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man, imagine all the people sharing all the world. And it says in the song that you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one, and I hope someday you will join us. What I'm bringing up this is for you to actually know that we share one thing in common, which is human being. And even when we are different, we are not deficient. And whatever has happened in history has a lot of things to do with interest and also the social stratification. So I go back to what Maria said in the introduction, which is the fact and indelible truth that you must continue to say and have it as your own personal dictum too, even when you are dealing with people of color or the black people. That black people or people of color are intelligent, smart, hardworking, brave, resilient, beautiful, strong, cultured, and creative like any other human being within the cosmos. And someone will ask me, why do you have to say this? We all know this. And it's just like people who are saying Black Lives Matter. They don't actually mean that all lives do not matter. It's due to the fact that this basic truth has been challenged in history. This basic truth has been falsified in history, and we need to reaffirm it, because in the consciousness of many other people or some people, they still live in the past. And that is one of the basic truths that guides this presentation. And the question is, who is black? Like when someone say I'm black, I just feel the person just want to use that to join me with all other people of color, whether African or African in diaspora or beyond. So for the sake of this presentation, I said we can actually use an inclusive or exclusive definition of what it means to be black. The inclusive means that all other people who are dark skinned or colored people across the globe are part of that category, or the exclusive is just to say people across the globe who have African ancestry or who have African roots. And for this presentation, I'm talking about the exclusive aspect, in order to be able to capture a singular or some part of history that are actually peculiar to people of African descent. So when we talk about all the blacks, or many black people we see, and tagged Afro Puerto Rican, Afro-Dominican, Afro-Jamaican, Afro-Grenadian, and some other people before. Americans don't really want, some Americans, though blacks, don't prefer black Americans, they don't want African, but a lot of people are now claiming African American because they want that, they're proud of that appendix of that prefix. And then we still have black, Asians, Indians from that continent. And then if you look at when we analyze this in history, there's something that is common, is of African heritage, of African roots. And this African root, a lot of people find it difficult, especially those in diaspora, find it difficult to want to accept that one. And most of all, this has more to do with how history has been narrated in such a way that the African in diaspora and the African in the continent seems to be turned against one another from some of the perspective of the told aspect of history, which I'm going to demystify in this presentation. So we see the statistics of how the people called black, who are African diaspora, are across various parts of the world, and then we see them in large number in various places. In this presentation, therefore, I'm going to highlight, most importantly, the resistant part of it, because when you give a narrative and you present as if things were given to people in history, you destroy or you remove their agency in history. And then when we talk about slavery or colonialism, let's emphasize the black resistance, the black roles, the roles that the black people themselves played. Or we talk about eugenics or systematic racism in any form, let's identify the black genocidal in almost all spheres of life. And that is what I'm going to highlight in this presentation. I want us to know that when every year, when we talk about the Black History Month, we're not just talking about slavery and colonialism. And that's why I want the people of African origin, as well as all the people who are allies or who are interested in knowing about Africa, to know more about the stories of the great African empires and kingdoms, and to know that the people that are in diaspora who are considered to be slaves, children of slaves, I want that terminology of slaves to actually be corrected, as many historians have advocated. They are enslaved people. Most of them are from the lands where there were warriors, royalties, kings and queens, and priests and prophets, writers and musicians and sages that were captured and held in chain. And when we talk about this, if we start historical analysis of who a people are and their heritage and roots, and will reduce it only to slavery and colonialism, we are going to re-victimize the victim of history. And that's why I want us to have and to do more research, as the UNESCO has commissioned a lot of scholars, including Zainab, to do research, and we can find it online on Songhai Empire, the great Zimbabwe Empire, Tunisia Empire, which is in Carthage, and Kingdom of Kush, the Kingdom of Ghana, Songhai Empire, and the Azum Empire, Mali Empire, Mosai Kingdom, the Ethiopian Empire, which stood even against colonialism and was not colonized, and we found out now that it's even the homeland of this Christianity with a lot of heritage which has been identified. The Great Benin Kingdom, and then the wealthiest man, which is acknowledged in most historical book, Mansa Musa, with a wealth not just of goods but also of ideas. And when we talk about when we did history, like in my own study of philosophy. We started with the Greco-Roman philosophers to the modern, to the contemporary, but we ignore the fact that most of Thales and Anaximander and all this great figure in the ancient history of idea actually went to Carthage, went to Egypt to go and learn a lot from most of all this, and then this is shown in history. And most of the problems that people have is that there are a lot of books and a lot of literature that shows not just the wealth of just this kingdom, but to show the output and the magnificence of their artworks, or the geometry of their design, not just documented as in writing, but also illographic forms. And then we have this being brought up by a lot of scholars, but most of all this is unfortunate that these are not even included in the syllabus, and a lot of people don't read about this. Why I bring this up as we capture, before we go to the other part of the history that has always been discussed, which is slavery and colonialism, I want us to know that unless we undo the deletion of black contribution to the global intellectual tradition in almost all disciplines, we literally enchain the minds of black kids who think their race can only be known for raps and sports alone. Those are good, but that's not all about who they are. And unless we tell the truth about the history of the great empires and kingdoms, as I've highlighted them, as children unborn, we hate to be associated with African. And a lot of people of African heritage will not want to be attributed African. And that's why one of the African proverbs says that until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. That takes us to a basic fact which I want us to have at the back of our mind as we look at some of what will be presented in today's presentation. That African had great empire. Be proud of that as someone of African heritage, be it Caribbean or African British or African American. A disciplined society, a great and compassionate leader, intellectual and structured life, social structures which involves a lot of traditions that governs family life and marriage, economics and business and farming, engineering and arts, which is evident, and cultural perspective, which we know that is becoming evident as a lot of artists in diaspora and across the globe are bringing that up and then in medicine too, not just in other space. And this is a basic fact that we must hold in hand. So let's go to the issue of slavery. First of all, as the topic of today's presentation talks about the told and the untold. So I will talk about the told part of it, which you're a little bit familiar with. That, Africans sold Africans. And this black versus black narratives, I'll tell you, this is true that in some part of Africa, they had slaves, but not to this extent, not the way it has been presented. And that why are you troubled about Africa, because they sold you off. And there were cases of when students from the Caribbeans and students from America visited the Institute of African Diaspora Study at the University of Lagos, where I was working before coming to Europe. They were angry at the beginning because they were just disgusted at whatever I want to say as an instructor, saying that, well, you're not the one that sold us off. That narrative has always been presented and is a very divisive narrative, because it's presented as if they sold you off and afterward, we abolish it and let's celebrate the abolitionists. And who are the abolitionists? You will see it in books and in big textbooks of history that the black agency has been eradicated. I would just ask us, I don't look at some of this history in a kind of a pathetic way, or in a way to just begin to say like pity me or pity us or look at what happened, but look at it in a way to look at the resilience and the survivor, and also another perspective to this narrative. First of all, they were captured in thousands and in millions. And I don't actually know whether Africa has this technological sophistication which the Europeans carried along with machine gun to actually be able to chase people out of their home and get them captured and to be able to sell these people to them. So you will know to a great extent, as many historians have argued, that it wasn't like Africans were able to just capture their fellow Africans and take them to the border. But a lot of these villages were invaded and with cannonballs and machine guns chased out, and these people captured, sent on the ship, and even on the ship, as humans, they resisted, they fought. They fought, and that's, you see a lot of documentaries, especially that one of Samuel L. Jackson, trying to go into the Atlantic Ocean and bring out some of this evidence of all what really happened across the sea. There were a lot of resistance, and many who conformed and who endured the humiliation on arrival, and a lot of slave markets across, which are evident. And on the markets, stripped naked, sold across the Caribbeans and across America and across, and whatever they do, the work and the output is meant to develop the empire, and so it's not like it's being sold and it became to some people as their properties. But these people which we are talking about, who are human beings, they were quite aware of what was going on. But they endured many of these things because of the hope that they had. And this is what we celebrate about them. Their hope, their endurance, their perseverance as they went through a lot, not just in the plantation, but in the homes of the slave owners. And this is what we, irrespective of our race, color, anything, have to actually acknowledge in history, that this had happened to a group of human beings. And when we project or discuss issue of slavery, know that we have duty to show love and empathy, and to know that these people were not slaves. The ontological identity is not like slave, but enslaved people. And then we know that when people talk about this in a very painful manner, it has more to do, because like this is from the archive, and it has more to do with the treatment that those people received. As the archive shows that just for some offenses, many of them were hanged, many of them flogged, and this is historical. This is not hearsay, and these are not stories. And this is what we have to take a look at when we talk about slavery and condemn, because a lot of people still rationalize this. We need to condemn. And today, as I talk about celebrating or identifying people who are considered as rebels, people who are taken as people who are revolting, these people were not revolting, because every human person knows that I am human and knows that I have the right over myself and fight against all sorts of ill treatment, not just of yourself, but also of others. And then we know that in the Caribbean, like the present day Caribbean that we have a lot of these people, the enslaved people, who actually fought and created and found their way. The history shows us that right in the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century, what we had were series of resistance. And these people who resisted are not just anonymous people. They're people that are being celebrated today in various parts of the black nations, especially in the Caribbean. And then we know of the Haiti Revolution. These are wars, these are resistance, and these are not rebellions. That's one of the arguments. These are not rebellions. These are resistance against any form of treatment that every human person deserves to be treated as human. And then we talk about the Marrons. The Marrons were given this name, which in Spanish language means the runaway slaves, or those who escaped. But these are the people who actually shaped what we can say the present day Caribbeans. These people, they left plantations, escaped, found their way, created communities across the mountains in the Caribbean island, and not just creating what we can say communities and their family life and struggle to survive in those harsh conditions. They also created armies, and in order to ensure that they will not go back to such kind of. And then we have the historical Captain Kojo, who led the Marron people against attempts to trap them back and to enslave them. And then we have Buza, who in Barbados today is a kind of a national hero. And as you can see, it's shown there, it did not struggle just to free himself, to free a lot of all the enslaved people in the Caribbean. We have what we call the slave rebellion, which I feel that now the historians and present day historians begin to remove the word rebellions to resistance. We have Kwamina, and today, is the Guyana's national hero. Which these are enslaved people who freed themselves. We have Samuel Chappé. Samuel Chappé, when he was quoted, he said, "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live my life in slavery than live a life of a slave." So these are people that we celebrate. Most importantly, we identify the Jamaican Marons. The Jamaican Marons were known to actually for 2 wars that they fought successfully, and that the colonists had to sign treaty with them. And at some point, we acknowledge the fact that they work with the colonists in order to also pull back some people, other people who are trying to escape to back into the plantation. But at some point, they realize that just as we have tasted freedom, every other human being, not in deserves to taste the freedom and the fought and the present day Caribbean, and that we talk about the Caribbeans or nations across the island are actually the output of all their struggle as we have it today. This is a very good research that I would like you to actually take a look at, which would actually, it's a digital humanity project that tries to show some of all this resistance, recapture them, and reinvent them in a way that you can see that it was not easy to actually keep these people in chain. And it was not easy, so it wasn't like it was easy and then they were just like that. And that makes you to know something not only about a human being, but also about the black people, of who they are, as I've described at the onset. This is also a very good research which shows kind of a visual analysis of the slave market, and then you can check that online. And there are a lot of other works. We know the Samuel L. Jackson Enslaved, which is to also look at all the narratives of slavery apart from the told. So you have the Untold. I wish you can be able to watch Samuel Jackson's documentaries on the enslaved. At this point, I want us to take a look at the fact that some people feel that, the Africans at home who were not enslaved had it smooth, and they were just there. No, we have issue of colonialism, but I also want to know that the lot of the blacks, now when we talk about the blacks, the lot of those at home is not better than those who were captured and taken as slaves. And I will take a look at the told narrative of colonialism. We're told by the dominant narrative that colonialism, is just about coming to give infrastructure to black nations that don't have infrastructure. So the colonized people, as we're told, have no infrastructure before the Europeans came to their rescue. They were stark naked and illiterate. They were barbaric and primitives, and this was not just narrated, proved. They were shown, written by great philosophers, Hume, Hegel, and many others. And they captured them. They had no clothing and shoes, and uncultured and tutored people. And we have to give them an organized society. There was the colonial propaganda. And that is what the told narrative. And then the colonized people became like, we just need to go and help them. As an author says, they became the white man's burden. And then we gave them education. And then we provided medical facilities for them. We trained their police and military. We gave them religion and morality. Got rid of archaic structures and institutions. Helped them to process their natural resources, and with time, we gave them, or they requested for independence, and we ended it. And what we have now is the bad and corrupt leader that are messing things up. And that is what people hear. That's the narrative, the told narrative of the African, which is the homeland of the black people. And that makes a lot of people to say, man, is that the history of what I can be proud of? Can I say I'm African this? No, because they're not proud of such narrative. Now, the untold narrative, the truth, and the aspect is that the colonized people were not stark naked. They had all those empires, as I've already discussed. They were not primitive people, but they were subdued. And this propaganda went on and on to actually promote those narratives. They were made to feel inferior. And they were forced to learn everything about what has nothing to do with them, everything about the colonist kingdom. So they were alienated from their cultures and their ideology. The most important thing is to see the existing structure. Like you see most of all these kingdoms and that are presently called Africa today, and given names as those countries have names. They existed as kingdoms that were governed by kings, as we have the Yorubas and the Zulus, and chiefs, heads of families, priests, warriors, and even they protect their territory. But all they had was just local gun, that's the maximum, and all the things are arrows and shield. And they live their life with basic things and occupation, farming, goldsmiths, sculpture, and textile making. And the colonialists came with a structure which brings a kind of antithesis to the existence, with kind of some white settlers, traders and farmers, missionaries, governors and magistrates. And then if you look at this, the relationship between the existing structure and the structure that was brought by the colonists with the propaganda that I've described above, was simply try to actually make the narrative to be subtle. But what happened was, like, the governors and the magistrates were controlling things, removing chiefs, replacing chiefs, and anyone who will not conform to their wills and demands sent on exile, jailed, poisoned, and killed. And a lot of all these kingdoms were subdued under cannon balls, machine guns, and a lot of killing took place. And that is one of the things that you'll be able to look at as a true character of colonialism. And that's one of the things that you have to look at, the untold part of the narratives. If you look at what the propaganda says, the colonies' acclamation, according to the 3C: commerce, civilization, and Christianity. But the commerce was to process the resources that were there and taken across the Atlantic. The civilization, in quotes, I wonder what civilization is, as a lot of other scholars have actually questioned that. And then the idea of Christianity, which was also propagated as part of what was taken to these people, to the black continent. And then we know that a lot of things have come up, and a lot of things have shown that some of all this propaganda were not true. But my role in this presentation is to highlight the struggle of the people, as well as showing the resistance, the role that they play in order to bring the present day black nation to what it is today. And we talk about the colonialist abuse in Zimbabwe, and the camps that were spread across, and various killings of in Tanzania by the German soldiers, and a lot of apologies and things are going on. The Algerian mutation of people, and then we talk about the British camps, when the Mama people resisted and said, no, we can't take this any longer. A lot of camps where people were kept in chains, and where people were subjected to all form of ill treatment, just because they say, we have a right in our land. We have a right to, our leaders cannot be kept in chain. Our kings cannot be deported. Our nobles cannot be subjected to humiliation. And our children cannot be taken across the shore just as tools for other nations. And this way, the roles that they played as humans, to be able to show that they need freedom, they need to be emancipated. And you look at this with slavery, you say, what's the difference? That colonialism also has an agenda. We talk about present day Namibia, that a lot of presently a lot of money has been taken to them, which the president rejected, of the concentration camps. And all the killings, not just being killed, they were also used for experimentation. And you see that when they used for experimentation to add insult upon injury, they were also use those researches to prove that they are nothing but apes. And many of them were not just subdued and subjected at home, but taken out for entertainment across Europe and America in what we call the human zoos. And a lot of these people were taken to display naked, put in cage, and we know a lot of accounts of millions of people who come, and this was for those who were not even part of colonialism and who may be saying no against slavery. The projection of the black person and those at home being brought over and put in chain, and people are seeing them for the first time, is to project them as nothing but less human. And we talk about humiliation, many of them because of their futures, as we talk about this, the woman who was subjected to all form of abuses before even to the point of her death, and taking, it was Mandela who requested for a body from the museum, in French museum, so that it can be buried in 2002. We know of Otebenga, who was taken by missionaries, a missionary priest, back to America just to be used for exhibition in the museum. And then we talk about the Belgium's emperor, who claimed that he owned the whole of Congo, and started using the people themselves to extract their natural resources. And anyone who did not conform, have them amputated. Millions were amputated. History tells us. These are evidence. And these are some of the things that need to be brought up for people to actually see and empathize and be able to understand what actually took place in history. Apart from the humiliation taken off at home, outside, many of them, when we talk about World War I and II, they were taken in large number. They fought. The host will not treat them well. The people, the colonists that took them from their colony, compelling chiefs to submit certain numbers of people, will not, and taking them ashore for war they know nothing about. And today people talk about those wars as if they were no black agencies. Many of them did not just die in the hand of their host, but they also died when they were captured. They were not treated like others. They were separated and annihilated. Many of the sons of the black nations never stepped back into their motherland. And that is one of the truths of the history. And the truth is this, that as we now have it in various publications on journals and other things, digging out this untold narrative, people are coming to say, why were they not even acknowledged? Why were they not even put in monuments to actually show that they played a role? This is part of what we talk about, the untold part of the history, and which are coming up. If you look at the sophistication of slavery and colonialism, you realize that it has more to do with the technology. And it's a kind of someone having upper hand, subduing the other. And you know, the replication of this in history is what we are against. And that is why we actually take a continuous look at black history. If you look at most of this resistance that the black people put up during most of all this injustice and discrimination, ill treatment, as we have some, they were just fighting with mere arrows and bows against sophisticated weapons. But we acknowledge and appraise them, we celebrate them for their resistance, for their valor, and for their readiness to drive for the cause of freedom. And we have a lot of the Battle of Shanghai. They kept on fighting. The Battle of Shanghai, the individual who rose up like John Chimbele to lead a lot of other people in Malawi to actually fight against subordination, to resist this ill treatment. We talk about what happened in Namibia too, as I've discussed, but we celebrate today Samuel Mahareru, who is one of those people who actually stood up and helped the people, even though most of these wars, they were not victorious. And they were killed and sprayed like ants. And that's why you see when young people and many other people talks about certain category of people's life matters, when they look at history, they realize that it never matters because they were killed in their homeland like ants. We talk about the Maji resistance and how they were killed like ants. And then we talk about, well, the Zulu army, the formidable kingdom, that actually had what we can say the sources that everyone across the globe sees celebrate the Battle of Isadwana. The Battle of Ishedwana is the battle in which, for the first time in history, shields and arrows conquered cannonballs and all sorts of sophisticated weapons. The Zulu warriors fought and conquered the colonists as at that time with just their arrows and bows. And this is one of the things that we should be able to know, that we should not picture just these people as just people who were just like given freedom at a matter of time, but people who resisted and fought and laid down their lives. In Nigeria, we talk about Muhammad Atahiru, the war against the British in 1903, the Basonto Gun War in the what we can say, Basonto, which is the present day part of southern part of Africa. And we acknowledged that they fought, they tried, and they showed the world. All this resistance taught the world a basic lesson, that all lives and all human beings should be treated, and all human beings are equal. And even when you put chain on any one person with sophisticated weapons and whatever, it can never last long. And we acknowledge the role that Ethiopia played in trying to ensure that they were never colonized. And it wasn't they were never colonized, not just because European powers were not interested in colonizing them, but they fought and they won. And the irony part of it is that the world is celebrating Ethiopia because they discovered that even most of the Christianity that people were thinking, let's go take to Africa, they found out that it was existing. And today we talk about the World UNESCO World Heritage, where they found a lot of underground 13th century churches in Ethiopia, and you find out that they were part of the early, they were actually, the early Christian community was vibrant here in Africa, and that is the truth. And today we also look at, when we look at the narrative that seems to just project a kind of a freedom was given, it will remove the role of the nationalists. And then we find the African nationalists, most of them who actually ended up giving their lives, like Kwame Nkrumah, who actually, instead of resisting with guns and weapons and all sorts of things, but actually learned the way of the colonists, learned the language, schooled, endured everything, and discourse and dialogue. And they fought, argued for the freedom and that is being enjoyed in what we call the present-day black nations. So we identify their role and agency. Amadou Ahidjo in Cameroon, Sylvanus Epifanio in Togo, Modibo Keita, these are heroes across the black nation in Mali. And we talk about Philia Bates in Malawi, in Madagascar, present-day Madagascar. And then we talk about Joseph Kasavubu in Democratic Republic of Congo, and Patrice Lumumba, who is actually known as the martyr of the Pan-African movement. These people in the late 40s, 50s, down to 60s, it was like a renaissance. They came to that consciousness and they come to realize that this dialogue must take place, and the black people have the capacity to rule over themselves, and they have all that it takes, like every other people across the world, to actually be people, humans, with their own self-determination and the capability to take the future of their race and their people beyond any imagination. So the question still comes up, as people are dialoguing and debating, is slavery wrong? And the question, is colonialism wrong? It still comes up. And when we look at some of all these things, some people will come with a lot of arguments saying with regards to slavery, they were enslaved free and real people, but the Africans themselves were the ones selling themselves. If they were not taken as slaves, would they have become what they are today? A lot of people looking at the back and forth, and a lot of people looking at colonialism. Was it not the white people that actually make them to be who they are today, and all these other things, and the European powers? For me, I said all this rationalization will uncover, will cover our eyes, or will prevent us from seeing atrocities and from coming to realize that these sort of things need to be prevented in future. My own argument at some other presentations I've had has always been that if the growth of this, the people who are currently known as the black race, has not been truncated by those events in history, as they have been part of the Neolithic agricultural green metallurgical revolutions that took part before the 15th century, which they were fundamentally part of it, they would have been part of the industrial and the present day revolution that we actually witness. And a lot of things that people say that where were your ancestors, where were your people, they didn't actually know that within this interruption in ages has a long way to present a lot of what we call the black people in our present day to society. This event and incidents, apart from the fact that the African diaspora or dispersed across the globe through slavery, we also have the presence of other whites or European settlers in Africa who are living peacefully, and nobody is disturbing them except the Zimbabwe and Mugabe's incident that happened in the 80s. But a lot of these people are still benefactors of the lands and farms, and they live there. So you come to realize that migration is not just some people moving to Europe, as people are always talking about immigrants. But they talk about, you also look at the human being. People have the freedom to live in any part and to be treated as humans. We also look at the part of the colonialism, which actually stripped the people, the indigenous people, of what they have, of their identity, of their culture. And we think it's actually great that in the present day there is all what we call the revitalization of some of all these cultures, languages, and heritage. So as some people ask the question whether slavery is wrong or colonialism, sometimes a lot of people may still be asking, is racial discrimination wrong? Is microaggression wrong? Is vocalized ignorance that we see on Twitter, Instagram, people writing what they don't know and still victimizing others of their history? We begin to ask ourselves those questions, that whether those ones are still wrong. And I think the time has come for us, when we talk about the Black History Month, to ensure that we actually take our stand. Some of the languages that were used during the slavery and the colonialism still comes up in our present day world. You see the word unruly violence and all those 10 rebels, which are linguistic carnage to actually re-victimize the victims of history. So other arguments that will come up that people still take a look at in the present day, which for the allies or people who feel that we need, when we take a look at this history, we should not just talk about this as stories, but we should also act, has to do with the present day victimization, as we have in museums of other forms of images that still project, like they talk about the one that people are alarming or raising alarm about is the Royal Museum in Central Africa, of some of the demean picturing of Africans. And these are some of the things that actually happened many years ago that are still being pictured and being narrated. And the question is this: why will you devote your time to learn such when there are other museums too across Africa or other places where some of this heritage are actually being pictured in the way they should be narrated and the truth of what history is? So when we look at some people looking at the present day discrimination and other things, we know that all this have their root in some of all other representation in media. And then we know that the scientific, or what we now know as pseudo-science, which is false science, which actually plays the black race below all others, are the role to play in the way that people begin to see that a race is lower to the other. And we have to acknowledge in a brief way some of the roles that certain people played, as Hitler was in the Olympic 1936 trying to show superiority of race and others. We thank Owen, as he was able to win 4 gold medals and show the world that the black race is not inferior. And then we know of a lot of African Americans who actually excel not just in sports but invented a lot of things. We talk about Benjamin Banneker. You can make research on that and what he invented. And then we talk about Madam C.J. Walker. We talk about Elizabeth Marco, we talk about George Edward Akron, who invented the X-ray spectrometer, and then we talk about George Carter Washington, the leading agronomist of his time, Leonie Johnson, who invented a lot of things for the NASA and for the Army in America, and then we talk about Charles Drew, who was a pioneer in blood research that saved a lot of lives during the World War II, and we talk about Garrett Morgan, who rescued a lot of lives by inventing the safety old, which is a precursor to the present-day gas masks. We talk about James Edward Marco, who was a physicist that gave the bed foundation to what we have in the present-day computers, telephones, and all form of electronic microphones that we actually use today. And these people show themselves that in spite of whatever you may present us, we are still who we are, humans with all capability like other human beings. Most outstanding thing is the founder of the modern Russian language was actually a descendant of a slave, and then we have that. What I want us to take a look at as we move on with other part of presentation and take a look at the Black History Month is that the media one-sided narrative still presents most of the propaganda of the colonists and present poverty, present crimes, attach it and glue it, and a lot of people talking about IQ, but these are single-sided narratives, and we have to fight against or resist what we can say single narratives. Today, many people may not know that the present day African nations are like this. This is what they are. And when they say, we send you back to Africa, or we send when anything comes up, people are just always talking anything. But you see Angola, you see Morocco, you see Kenya, you see South Africa. So when you talk about your heritage as Africans in diaspora, you should be able to understand the fact that your heritage is not bush or forest, but this is the present day what Africans turn Africa to themselves as a black nation, the present day Tanzania, the present day Nigeria, which is Abuja, the present day Tunisia, the present day South Africa. And you find out that media will always want to show all the people tattered in all this part of the world. Finally, we should know that everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact at times. And everything we see is a perspective. And the only way to arrive at the truth is to combine all sorts of perspective together. Together, let us as allies, as black people or people of African heritage and root, let us make effort to present and to make more research into the role, the agency of our people in history in almost all sectors of life. My hope at the end of this presentation is that the black people or people of African heritage who have listened to this will restore their pride and self-esteem and have appropriate response for healthy conversation on race. You don't need to be rough about it. You just need to be calm and present your case and avoid reverse racism. Don't begin to look at white people as to be blamed for any woe of what happened in history or what is happening in the present, because those people too, people you see on the road, people you may think they are just human beings too with their dreams and vision, and who are hearing of what happened in history and who are not actually the perpetrators. Never demean yourself in order to fit someone else's ignorance. Know the facts and present the facts. And when you argue against wrong perceptions and stereotypes, do it in a cool manner and don't be programmed to feel inferior. Don't ever. And for the people who are white allies who are listening to these presentations, or all the people from various parts of the race and whatever, when you have heard of this history, try to do more research to gain informed knowledge, understand history through various narrative and perspective. Show understanding, love, and compassion for the black minorities in your own community and in your own neighborhood. Our pride lies in the fact that our ancestors, those stripped of all dignities, knew who they were and overcame all restraint. We honor their lives in all ramifications, and we know that their story and whatever has happened in the plantation, has happened in most of all this colony, is also our story. Their victory is also our victory. And what they have been able to prove against every stereotype and prejudice is also our justification, as we are not responsible to be proving that today, but to live our life peacefully and rejoice in the victory that has been won for us. This is our history. This This is our heritage and we are proud of who we are. Thank you.